Hello, Force Management Nation. Jim Kennedy back here with you at Fort Belvoir with CGSC. Today we're talking a bit about force integration, how we take all these topics and areas that we're trying, their ongoing efforts within force management, meet them all together to form a brand new unit or to modify a unit. So let's get into a train. All right, that's kind of what I mentioned. This is my simplified definition of force integration. It is that synchronization in time and space of all those solutions across .mil PFP. And it's bigger than that as well, because even though you've got to have your doctrine written by the time you activate this, your organization designed, people trained, leaders trained, personnel policies, facilities built. There are other actions that are looked at in the FIFA, the force integration functional analysis, such as readiness, funding, sustainability, stationing. All those problems, issues, and concerns have to be solved so that that unit can all the solutions come in place together in time and space so that unit can train. All the while, there's planning always ongoing. You're programming how much funds this is going to cost. You got to come up. Congress has got a budget and give us money for it, and then we have to execute that spending on the proper missions. All the while, we're looking at proper stewardship of our fiscal resources, of our people, of our time, and obviously throughout the whole thing is risk management. Do we delay execute? Do we delay this unit? Do we activate this unit, not another one? Do we fill it up to the full requirements or only partially authorized? Throughout this whole effort, the HQDA G357 is the lead to supervise and kind of herd the cats because there are a lot of organizations involved in this. Army Material Command with MCOM and the Corps of Engineers are probably involved with facilities management, policy with the G staff, doctrine with TRADOC, training being designed as TRADOC, material with the acquisition system. You get the idea. All of this has to be a big program management, if you will, to make sure it's all executed in a timely manner effectively. Is it always 100%? No, it is not. But that's what the oversight looks at to assess the risk of what isn't and can't be done on time. But everything's based on priorities. Okay, it's all based on priorities. So we want to create this unit. Okay, but what's the priority of that mission for that unit? People say we don't have enough money. Yeah, we have enough money. We have almost 180 billion dollars a year given to us by Congress. Problem is, we don't always have the right priorities. Well, you don't think you're a priority. You may think it's important, but the Army has priorities. It's a better way to put it. So let's take a look at these, how we get them. The first priority document you need to be aware of is the FATM, the Force Allocation Decision Model. Is from the Joint Staff. That gives us what the joint priorities are. And that's the boss's priorities. And that gives us very, very strategic guidance for force allocation for the global force. Then you have the Army's priorities. It's called the Army Resource Priority List. Those are the big strategic priorities that we're going to have for the Army. And I put a little majors insignia there because there are a lot of majors that work on the Army staff working priorities. Right? Then we have to kind of combine those two. We have to take the joint priorities and the Army priorities that the senior leadership provides us, and we put them together. And the first document is the ERPL that consolidates and marries up and nests the Army's priorities with the joint priorities. And that is the Integrated Requirements Priority List. That gives us operational guidance. Okay. And I'll give you an example of this in just a minute. And that's a little closer fight. That gives more specifics to it. And then from there, you get the DARPL, the Dynamic Army Resource Priority List. That gives tactical guidance. That's which organizations will be in priority for equipping, for manning, for funding, for training, for you name it, for deployments. Okay, so that's usually by UIC tactical type guidance. And that DARPL feeds your downstream system. So if you're high on the DARPL or the Dynamic Resource Priority List, you're higher on the list for funding, for personnel fill. You're higher up there for new equipment fielding. Okay, so that just kind of makes sense. The higher you are, it's no different than your own family. If you've got kids, you may have a ERPL of, hey, we want to make sure the kids do all their activities, but you may have a DARPL. Hey, I'm going to Susie's softball game today, but I can't go to Tommy's math competition at school next week because we're in the field. Okay, which kid gets priority sometimes over the other. That's a DARPL, and it changes all the time. Those downstream systems are all changed because of the DARPL. The DARPL, if you've heard of the patch chart is like a graphical representation of the DARPL, if you will. It lays out over time which units are higher priority than others at that time. And all the while, you're looking at ethical stewardship of your resources, of missions, of funding, personnel, equipment, etc. You try to do that the best you can. All right, so how do we even get our heads around this whole big thing called force integration? This is a huge enterprise that we're dealing with here. Well, we have the Army Synchronization meeting. It's a weekly meeting. You can see the directed members there. The Chief of Staff, the HQDA G357 is the chair. And their whole purpose is to every week look to integrate and synchronize what's going on with the Army with change, be it new units being created, with changing the DARPL, how that might affect modernization, what missions are coming up, and they make decisions. They can either hold decisions for the Sec Army and the Chief of Staff to make, or they can have for the Undersecretary of the Army and the Vice, or they can make decisions at this forum on their own, depending on the thresholds that they have. And they produce a lot of summaries and records of what decisions are made. And they look at what future decisions and topics they'll be looking at in the future. So that's a weekly meeting. A lot of effort goes into that because change happens. It's weekly because change is so frequent and there's so many things going on. Those senior leaders there you see, those are some big heavy hitters. A lot of 3-stars are looking at how we're managing change and the progress we're making. All right, so these are the topics we're going to talk about today. We're not going to hit all of them. We're just going to hit the one there in black personnel next, because even though we have to do a lot of different topics for force integration to get everything synchronized in time and space, the focus of this class at CGSC is how do we get personnel, equipment to form those units so they can begin training to enter the Rearm force generation model. Sustainment is still going on with medical care, child care, schools, hospitals, chapels, etc., family housing, family support, training. All those other topics are happening without a doubt. We're just not going to be covering them here in this class. So let's get into it with people. We're talking about manning the Army. The G3 of the 7 supervises the structure of the Army. And it's fairly obvious. They approve the organizational documents, the TDAs, the TOs, the MTOs. That's their approval process. That's what they do. So that's the structure of the Army, the bones of where everybody's assigned and what it takes. They do that through the force management system, and we call that the spaces, the chairs, the seats, the spaces that people will occupy in jobs. That then translates over to the G1, who supervises the manning of the Army, where they actually put faces to the spaces. And when you get your jobs in AIM, that's the G1 saying, okay, who do we need to send to this job to do the best job in a certain organization? And they also publish Army Manning Guidance, which we'll talk about in just a minute. So with the Army Manning Guidance, that's basically the plan, the short-term plan of which units by DARPL, right? It's influenced by the DARPL, the dynamic priority list that changes based on missions and other factors. So the G3 sets the DARPL, G1 uses that to determine the manning guidance and what organizations will be filled to what levels. And I put a lot of little majors insignia there because there are a lot of majors in the G3, in organizations, and in the G1 at HRC who are managing these priority documents and managing the Army Manning Guidance, writing it, providing input to it, and staffing it, and even at HRC as assignments officers. Okay, so that Army Manning Guidance will then go to HRC, who will then fill personnel assignments. Key point here is the G3 supervises the structure. They approve our authorization requirements documents, TOs, MTOs, TDAs, and the G1 fills those spaces with faces and publishes Army Manning Guidance, which I'll talk about right now. Jim McConville says people are our priority, but we have to have a plan to put the right people in the right jobs at the right time for the right units for the right missions. And it's a very complicated process. It's not as easy as it sounds. We're going to put this slide and the next one about the active component manning guidance. The reserve component and National Guard have your own, so I would be asking your G1 personnel for maybe a copy of that. It's probably got some classified parts of it. We're going to talk the unclassified part here. But the G1 formulates and publishes this active component manning guidance, but they can't do it alone. General McConville or the G1 signatures on the bottom, but the G3 provides a lot of input. Who's got to go to collective training? Because that's the priorities. Who's got any special mission requirements? Any emerging or undocumented requirements that may not be within some of our other priority documents. And then the current ARPL and DARPL priorities and the RStruct, the Army Structure Memorandum, that tells us the size of the Army and what everybody's going to have. Those are all valid inputs, vital inputs to the G1, so they can come up with the right numbers of percentage fills of units projected over the next couple manning cycles. And HRC implements that manning guidance. So if you're in a unit and you're supposed to be at 80%, that's an Army priority, because we have enough people to go around. We have enough people, 480,000 or 485,000, somewhere along in there, and we had that many spaces. The problem is we have a lot of people in school, right? We have 900 majors roughly a year, Fort Leavenworth for a year. We have NCOs in school, Sergeant Majors Academy, senior leader courses. We have soldiers in AIT. So they're all in school, but they're on the Army, but they're not in a unit. So we have the people where they're just in some type of professional development generally. So we got to slice the cheese somewhere and make the holes where we can assume risk. So if you're supposed to be at 80%, you're at 80%. Move on. Okay. And then everybody's got to just accept where you are and implement and adhere to the Army manning guidance. Don't be asking for people that you're short if you're only supposed to be at 80%. HRC is not going to give it to you. So choose wisely on who you ask for. Army assignments are complex, and this is generally an officer assignment process, but it applies somewhat to senior NCOs as well. Officers have their expectations, children, spouse jobs, spouse timelines, your skills experience, family issues, all those, places you want to go, places you don't want to go. All those are great, and they're not wrong. But then you've got the Army's got to manage readiness. Certain units have to have certain people, certain skills, and then there's the requirements. But they've also got to manage your leader development, be it professional military schooling, certifications, certain jobs you need to have so you can be competitive for promotion to the next level. All of those are important, no matter if you're officer or NCO. Problem is, how do you balance those? Of course, the other thing too is it wouldn't be CGSC if there's no triangle in your lesson. So, but it's a very complex problem of how to do that. So let's briefly talk about the officer manning cycle and how that generally works. They do these twice a year, but our problem is supply doesn't always equal demand. People want all the slots filled, but needs of the Army comes first, and where you got to go. And the operations branch that does all the math behind the scenes to determine the Army manning guidance and how this can affect units that are coming from the manning cycle, they determine the spots that are open, not the branches. So your assignment officer isn't sitting there determining which slots will be filled or not, but the operations branch does that. And again, we don't always have, if you have a vacancy, if you say, hey, my friend Major Smith is leaving 21st TSC and I've always wanted to go to Germany, so I want to go take his spot. That doesn't mean that's going to be just because he or she is leaving doesn't mean that's going to be a slot to be filled in the next manning cycle. Because that commander may decide, hey, I'm good on logisticians, but I need another signal officer or whatever the branch is. So you have your assignment officer who works in the branch, who works for and is the generally a major or a junior lieutenant colonel or captain, depending on what rank you are. They're your interest. They're your voice to the process. Then you have the account manager who's assigned to HRC, but manages the accounts of 1st Cav, the Joint Staff, Pentagon, 3rd Army, whoever. And they're the voice for the units. So the unit commander saying, I want these 10 skills MOSs filled and ranks filled. They're the ones who are working with the unit and the operations branch to determine what gets opened. The assignment officer is looking at who's available during the cycle. And you get those emails, hey, I've got you, but possibly going to move this cycle. What do you think? Or are you available? Are the things, and the assignment officer gets your feelings and maybe extends you or whatever. or at least you know. The account manager is looking at USRs, talking to units, getting their priorities of fill from the units, and they're IDing those unit priorities. And then so that's the Army requirement, and then there's the available inventory. That then goes and looks into what's called a MER, the requirements listings, just open validations, open requisitions, based on the manning guidance. Okay? If certain units are supposed to be at 80%, 90, 100%, that's what's going to get filled. And then here's an example. We may have 900 assignments, but only about 700 available officers. So that's a little extreme, but you get an idea. There's generally more requirements than there are people available. And it's just that you have to start working actions to fill that gap between the two. Your assignment officer is that representative for you, for the branch, and then the account manager represents the unit at a manning conference where they come in and say, hey, I need 15 armor officers to go to Fort Hood. Okay, fine. I've only got 13 armor majors, if you will. Well, you take 2 captain promotables or 2 senior captains who are about to be promotable, and they bounce back and forth on requirements to kind of balance the books to match the requirements versus the inventory. It's way more complicated than that, but just kind of oversimplifying it. And then they come up with a draft requirements list after they edit conversations with the units and what's available. That then goes to the director for approval. Holistically, they're not saying, hey, Major Smith's going to X unit. They're looking at saying, big picture, this unit is supposed to be 80%, and we're projecting them at 81. This unit is supposed to be 100, we're projecting them at 98. Things like that. That's big visibility DARPO units, okay? And then they build the requisitions into the assignment system. You try to find the right officer for the job using AIM-2. I've not gone through that personally myself as assignment process. It's been around a couple of years now, but trying to match the best people for the right jobs. And then the requirements are cut. Possibly, this is just sort of like an approximate timeline here. You're IDing officers like in February. These conferences are in March. They start running the process in April, and then requisitions open about May so that you can start signing up for jobs and getting out there. That's not exactly perfect. And then you start that reporting cycle in on September, roughly. Don't hold me to those timelines. This is just for illustration purposes here. But that's kind of how the process works. And to try and get people to organizations when they are going to stand up or need them for training purposes. This chart does not apply to a lot of functional areas who do individual by name manning, or chaplains and JAG officers who are done separately, but have to be worked into the overall percentages. So hopefully that clears up the manning conference and how the officer assignment cycle works holistically. All right, let's talk a little bit about equipment now. So where are you at a unit going to see force integration? It starts way early. At the end, I'll get to a chart on where force integration starts, but at a unit, you're most likely going to see it starting for you as a battalion XO, as a 3, or somebody in an operational unit, where you sign for the equipment after it comes out of production and deployment to you through new equipment training, new equipment fielding. The JLTVs, the new 9mm pistols are big examples right now. So that's where you'll kind of see it for you at a unit level. There are tons of actions going on behind the light switch, if you will. We'll talk about later. But when you get that new equipment arriving, that's the G3. This is an operational event. Force management change is a G3 operational event. It should be treated like an operation. The G3 is responsible for planning. At the division level, you may have you most likely have an FA50 who is helping coordinate this, but it is the G3 is signing for it. The G4 is there responsible for ensuring the accountability is done correctly. The G4 doesn't plan new equipment training or new equipment fielding. The G4 and the unit S4s and supply sergeants are there to make sure accountability is correct. Right. G3 plans what units are going in what order. G3 plans how many seats you're allocated, along with coordinating with the acquisition of how many seats are available. The G3 will account for ranges, assign organizations to ranges or training areas that they need. So that's all a G3 and commander's responsibility. All right. So if you're out there in a unit and you're short equipment, or how does new equipment get to you? Let's run through the process. And this is only for programs of record. Think JLTV, the new 9mm pistol is coming out, equipment is coming out of the Defense Acquisition System to be fielded to units, the new IVAS whenever it comes out, things like that. So equipment distribution, they have a twice a year, they have a semi-annual meeting called the Army Modernization Equipping Conference. It is hosted down at Redstone at Army Material Command, but it's co-hosted by Army Material Command and the Army G3 and the Army G8, where there's three co-chairs, and they'll talk about modernization. They'll look at big policy issues that the Army is having. They'll look at the new DARPL. They'll talk about ACOM concerns. What does TRADOC, Futures Command, the ASCCs, what concerns do they have about their equipping? And also the program managers will sit with the individual organizations and say, okay, here's where we've got your new equipment for this coming. Where's where your new equipment coming for this, or here's when you're getting these shortages filled. So it's a very important meeting for equipment distribution and redistribution. So if you're in the S4 section, or you're in the G4, or in the 3 shop as a planner, you ought to know about this meeting, because that'll tell you when your equipment will be coming, at least a plan for it. But odds are, okay, and also Army Material Command is the executive agent for equipment distribution. And I'll explain that the G8 does play a role, but Army Material Command is the executive agent, or the lead material integrator, and their Army Sustainment Command out of Rock Island is the executive agent and executes and manages this process. And you'll see in blue, I've got some areas here filled in blue, that's the redistribution of on-hand equipment. So equipment the Army already has in the inventory, when we deactivate a unit or change a unit or move a unit, Army Material Command owns that material. They can distribute it how they deem necessary to increase readiness. So you're sitting out there in a unit, Major Smith, Sergeant Major X, First Sergeant Y. You have this shortage of piece of equipment. How in the Bobby Boucher does that get filled? Well, initially, your shortage is sitting in GCSS Army or DERS reported on USR. There's a deliberate process. There are two types of processes, deliberate and rapid. I'm going to go through deliberate first. So your shortages are identified in the Logistics Information Warehouse, big computer database, just accept it. And that, as I mentioned earlier, Army Material Command is responsible for equipment distribution to solve those shortage problems. And Army Sustainment Command uses what's called the Lead Material Integrator Decision Support Tool. It's available in RCOP, the Army's Common Operating Picture. If you're not familiar with it, I would recommend getting on it. Have somebody in your unit show you. Your supply sergeant should know it. Your maintenance folks should know it. It's good for operational level leaders and organizational leaders to see your readiness standing. Supply, a lot of other features can be done out of there. Get your junior officers and junior NCOs familiar with it. But they use this decision support tool, and it uses a huge algorithm and has a lot of factors that influence decisions. Your unit may be short a fuel tanker. Great. Okay. Don't know why it's short, doesn't matter. But there may be a few extra fuel tankers around the Army inventory. Well, which one's the best one to send you, depending on your location? Some factors that may factor into where you get it from, or if you get it, is your rearm status. What model are you going to be in rearm? That's the Army's new 4th generation model. What's the availability of the equipment? Okay, I mean, how many are available do we have? Where are you on the priority list? What equipment do you have due in? If you've got new equipment fielding of new fuel tankers next year, the Army, and not on a deployment list, the Army's probably not going to give you a new one now. Why waste that money when you don't really need it? Okay, if you need one, borrow it from another unit for training. Where are you in the DARPL on the priority list? How much money is available to move equipment around? What's the readiness state of that material that's excess somewhere else? Is it broken, non-repairable? Is it serviceable, etc.? And what are your projected authorizations? If you're going through a reorganization next year and you're going to lose an authorization of a fuel tanker and you're short one now, they're not going to send you one. So you've got to know all of that. But this decision support tool factors all of it and many other factors. That's just some of the bigger ones. And it will kick out a proposed solution on a routine, if this is a routine fill. Okay, you're just training, you're not on any mission. So if it's a routine shortage fill, then there'll be a proposed solution that's sent out to the stakeholders, to you. Do you want this piece of equipment? To the losing unit, to the program manager, to the item manager, all these different people to vote on it and to get input. And then once that's adjudicated, it's all vetted, as I mentioned. Once that's done, there'll be a material released for shipment. So somebody will be told, Major Smith in Germany may be told, hey, put this, turn this thing in, take it to so-and-so at this standard, and it's going to be shipped to Unit X in Korea or Unit X at Fort Hood to fill a shortage. Okay, that's the way it works. Those lateral transfer directives you're getting, if you're familiar with those, are coming through this system. And this is the redistribution system. And then at some point, your shortage is filled. It's very complex, but that's a very simple process that Army Material Command owns. Now, how does it work with new equipment fielding, say the JLTV? Army Material Command is still responsible overall for the process, but for new equipment and recapitalized equipment, recapitalized is where you take a piece of equipment, send it to a depot, and it's basically a certified used car. So it's brought back up to Army specifications. It's been through a big service, so it's recapitalized. It's like new, but it's not new. The Army G8 has that process of distributing, in accordance with G3 DARPL priorities, new equipment and recapitalized equipment. So you'll see it in that little yellow color there, that cream or whatever the heck it is. Okay. That's the Army G8 and the program managers. Program managers do what the Army G8 tells them and ship it to units that the program managers don't determine the fielding schedule. That's all determined through the Army G8 based on Army G3 priorities. So their computer system will inform the LMI DST of what units will be getting what new equipment. And then if you're on the schedule, you will go through total package fielding, where the program manager will come down with repair parts, a training team, any special tools, etc., fill you up to your authorizations, and do your new equipment training for you. Then you go through a training cycle, and therefore your shortage is filled. Okay, so that's the oversimplified new equipment distribution or recapitalized equipment. So if it's a recapitalized piece, a recapitalized fuel tanker, they will tell the depot where to ship it to you. You'll get it through those supply channels, and you'll take your equipment. Alrighty. So that's the two deliberate processes. There's also APS, Army Pre-Post Stocks. You can draw equipment from that if you're going to an operation or a training event somewhere into like Europe. You could be drawing Army Pre-Post Stocks or Korea as a source of equipment, but they're not going to fill your MTO shortage back home at home station. Now, there's also the rapid process. The balloon's gone up somewhere. You've got a sudden mission. How does that work? Well, there are two different ways. One is for LAD units, for deploying units. You have what's called the UERWG, the Unit Equipment Reuse Working Group, where the senior mission commander on the base sits there and says, okay, Force Com units, okay, Brigade Commander X or Battalion Commander Y, what are you short? I'm short 2 fuel tankers, boss. G4. Who do you recommend give them up? So I recommend Battalion X gives up 2 fuel tankers. Roger. Cut the order. Move them over by this afternoon. Next. Okay, and you just shuffle the deck chairs within your own organization to solve any unit shortages. Okay, you don't need to go through a big Army process. The senior mission commander can do that right there. Okay, and you do the paperwork within G Army, and now the other unit's short, but the unit doesn't have a mission, so you do. Just that's called field grade helping out. And you also have what's called REF and ONS, the Rapid Equipment Force. Forget about them. They are closing down shop this year in 2021. But the ONS is always an option, the operational needs statement, where the commander can submit, hey, I need, because of this mission, I need 5 more generators, or I need 3 more fuel trucks because of this mission, and I don't have enough in my own unit to do it. You can go back to the Army through the ASCC or through your ACOM to the Army G3 to get, once you're in the area, to get more equipment signed to you. Okay? But then you turn it in after the mission is over. So that's just briefly how that works. Okay, it's a complicated process, but as a senior leader, if you're involved in readiness, you should understand that process and know the right people to talk to in your unit, your organization, to help get you. Your FA50 should be aware of LMI DST. The G4 should be aware of LMI DST. And of course, your FA50 should be able to help you out with information coming from the PMs. They should be able to find those point of contacts for you. All right. So now let's talk about Rearm briefly, just to introduce you to that. There's not a lot of it out there. There are a couple of articles on the internet, one from the Army G3, some from when they introduced it last year. So I'm going to give you what I have, and more will be coming eventually, but it is going to implementation in at the beginning, in October of this year, 21, so fiscal year 22. We've got to go through some organizational change. And our current sustainable readiness model won't help us to get to or support us during multi-domain operations. So this is kind of what we're going to do. We're going to move from a patch chart driven to regionally aligned focused ready Army. So we're going to have units that'll be regionally aligned for exercises in the different COCOMs as required. And we're going away from brigade centric, which worked in COIN, but to a division tactical focused Army. Okay, so that's a change now. So when divisions deploy, they'll deploy with their BCTs. And it's going to have similar models. I'll show you the models here in just a second. And not everybody's going to be equally modernized, because we just can't. I mean, it just takes time, and over time you will. But it's just going to, but the Compo 2 units won't be last. Neither will Compo 3. Okay, based on where you are on the DARPA, where you are on the mission chart, where you are in the war plans, that's how you're going to get modified. All right, so what's this next chart? And these are the mission lines. So you may have some that are highly modernized to the current modernizations. Some may have partial, or we call mid-tier equipment, and some will just have a base modernization. And others will have be a combination of all three. Okay, so you'll have some cabs in all of them, but that's just kind of the way it is looking. Now, what that's going to mean, more information to come out, but depending on what your missions and your baselines are. But we just had to come up with something that was more flexible, so that we can create the units that we need to give to combatant commanders. And these are the 3 different modules you might be in to get us to that. So you'll be in modernization modules. So you'll undergo new equipment fielding, say JLTV or any other ones. Your unit's unavailable for deployment. If you're doing a reorganization from one TDA to another. So that's not a bad thing. You'll be at low readiness, but that's because you're training to get ready. Once you come out of that, you'll be in a train module where you'll be mission tailored for what types of mission, and regionally focused. So you may be regionally focused on Africa, and you'll be tailored to whatever type missions would be coming up there. And then you'll have units that are actually on mission. That mission may be a training exercise in Europe for Defender. It may be a humanitarian mission. It may be a partnership training, partner for peace or training mission down in Africa, or it actually may be a contingency operation like we have in Syria. We're closing down Afghanistan, but things like that. Okay, but all units will be doing it. It's not just active component. Regular Guard or the National Guard, the Army Reserve will be doing this as well. And this is a screenshot because it's the only thing I took. I took it from an AUSA conference meeting. But if you've ever turned in equipment, gone through a new fielding, it's always a pain to turn all the equipment in. So Army Material Command has come up with these modernization, displacement, repair sites. They've done a couple of them. They're learning a lot from them. They're getting better. A lot of lessons learned, a lot of learning curve with this. But basically, when you go through with your JLTV, there's a joint inventory, but those items are turned in as is. So you're not spending a lot of time with your mechanics trying to get them fixed up to 1020. Army Material Command will do all that when they get the material. So you drop them off, units do your turn in, and then AMC then takes and disposes of the equipment. Either sends it out to a new unit, they send it to a depot, or they send it to the Defense Logistics Agency for disposal. But it's supposed the intent is to relieve the burden on units during new equipment fielding. Okay, so it'll have to be planned by G3s, right? This is an operational event. Which units are going? How are they going to get there? And of course, G4's got to be involved to make sure accountability is taken care of. But look for this. It won't be on every post installation because you just can't do them everywhere. But your big ones are going to have it. More to come on that. But again, this is a new concept that they're developing to unencumber units during this time frame of transition. There's a lot of it coming. A lot of units changing designs, new equipment fielding, the 6 priorities coming down, new equipment's being generated to help enable that transformation to a multi-domain capable force. And then this is kind of a chart that shows holistically how long it can take. It says on the slide, this is my slide, that it can take 5 years. It can. It can take 5 years to create a unit. It can also take a year and a half. I mean, you know, the SFABs were really done, designed, and deployed within a year. But that was an extreme case. We did the Stryker Brigade in about 3 years from, hey, I got an idea, to actually putting warheads on foreheads as a combat force in Iraq in 3 years. That's a whole brigade. But that's because they were needed. If you don't need the unit today or based on technology, I mean, look, future vertical lift units are going to take a couple of years. You know, long-range precision fires units will take a couple of years if you're developing a huge acquisition program. So things take time sometimes, but they can also go faster with some assumed risk. But you start doing that analysis on what force structure you need. You get some decisions made. You start documenting those units, those TOWs, TDAs. You start doing the sessions and start manning those units. Individual training, MOSs, start getting those facilities built or modernized or any new construction if needed. You get that equipping done from industry, delivered out to the unit, and new equipment fielding. That red section there is kind of your force integration, where you're doing your unit training to get certified by your 06 level command or higher command, so that you're now available to be to the G3 in that train or mission module of Rearm to be provided. Okay, and that's a 5-year period there. Okay, fine. It can be faster. It can be slower. It just depends on when the need is determined. Okay. So where does all this force integration begin? I wanted to save this to the end because, and you'll see why in a minute, but at the strategic level, it starts with the Army campaign plan. Those tasks to the ACOMs and ASCs on what they have to do. Total Army analysis, the guidance that goes into that, as well as the results, the wargaming, the data that goes into it, the FIFA analysis for the force integration functional analysis for new units at the strategic level. What do we have to start planning when this unit's created? What areas of focus do we have? And the ARPL, that big strategic guidance that we have for our future priorities. That's the strategic level of where force integration begins. At the operational level, it's that FIFA when, say, 3rd Army or 3 Corps gets that FIFA analysis for staffing, say, oh, they're thinking about creating a new multi-domain task force, and it might be in 3 Corps. So what does that mean for us? Where might we put it? All those different initial planning, warning order, if you will, documents. The Army Structure Memorandum that tells us what the Army is going to look like structure-wise by how many units by SRC for the next 2 to 7 years. There in there, we'll say activate this multi-domain task force at, and this is just Kennedy talking, at Fort Hood in 2025. Okay, well, you got to start planning that. Okay, MCOM can start planning how they're going to build, where the building's going to be. Start planning courses and what the workload is going to be in 2024 to graduate people to PCS. The acquisition system, how many pieces of equipment need to be made. The IRPL, the integrated priority list with that operational guidance, and the active component manning guidance that tells us what level of fill we need to add. We need to add those units to the process to determine what categories they're going to be in with level of fill. And at the tactical level, you can see some folks in the at Fort McCoy in the USAR looking at getting net on crew. The DARPL, while it's a strategic document, gives tactical guidance. So it tells what units when will be fielded new equipment. Will be converting from one type of unit to another, or one UI of one tow to another tow. The fielding schedule that comes out of G8 new equipment training, the manning cycle. Okay, that's a lot more tactical focused on which units will be getting people. So that's where force integration is spread out from the strategic level down to the unit actually receiving the equipment. Because there's always that question, where does it begin? Yes. Where does it end? Yes. It's all over. There's no one place. Okay. And this is a little summary of all the different topics we've talked about. It's a complicated process. If you're one of those who enjoys puzzles, this is the puzzle that you have to put together. Force integration can be looked at as a 10,000 piece puzzle, and you have a picture, but you're also missing about 2,000 pieces. And every month you get more pieces, but the picture changes. So some pieces are also taken away. So you lose 1,000 pieces, you get 1,000 pieces, the picture changes every month. So enjoy that. That's about the best equivalent I can give to you. So with that, I hope that gives you a broader picture of some of the processes within force integration, really only with people and equipment and priorities. We're not talking every piece of it, because it's a lot more complicated when you add in how doctrine is designed, how schools are developed and put through that program, policies, facilities. That's all got to be done as well as the funding piece. That's not in here. How you going to measure readiness, any other sustainment or deployment platforms that need to be done. There are myriad factors that have to go into force integration, but this is just a very small piece of the entire puzzle. Hope that helps you a little bit. Ask questions in the bottom. Give me some comments. Best of luck to you, and we'll see you on the high ground. Kennedy out.